This podcast is recorded on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coquitlam peoples.
British Columbia, I've seen your mountains high, seen your pretty rainbows and your blue crystal skies, watched your winding rivers as they flow around the bend. To me you're not a stranger, you'll always be a friend.
Coming to you from the West Coast, this is Politicos. Today is August 7th, 2025. I'm Scott Lundbohm, and joining me is David Moscrop. David, welcome back to the show.
It's so nice to be back. I was just thinking today that it's been so long since I've had a chance to join you, so I'm happy to be able to pop on in and say hello.
Yeah, I feel like it's been, 2 years, if not more, since your last appearance here?
Yeah, and it's funny because I live in Ottawa now, and I'm in the middle of the Ottawa nonsense, in suburban Ottawa, so I'm literally outside of the bubble, and that what's considered the bubble zone. But figuratively, I get enmeshed in it sometimes. But I've kept the tabs on BC politics a little bit, but I've also lost a lot of touch with BC politics, and joining you today makes me miss that a little bit.
Yeah, well, fortunately, it's a bit of a bad week for that to reconnect with BC politics because nothing's happened in the last 2 weeks. Seems like. On that note, a bit of a housekeeping note for the listeners. Apologies for not getting an episode out last week. Turns out it's real hard to get guests in the lead up to a long weekend in the middle of summer on somewhat short notice. But turns out not a lot was happening. So the hiatus we suggested might be happening in August happened at the start rather than the end. But the rest of the month should have a great slate of guests, starting with yourself, David.
Well, I'll try to do the lead off some justice and fulfill the job of an Ottawa hack as best as I can.
Great. Well, on that note, today's show we're going to be looking at 101 Days of Carney. The election night was just over 100 days ago, and we're going to kind of be breaking down the first bit of his time as Prime Minister. But before we get into that, you can support the show at patreon.com/politicos. Well, let's jump right into it then. Like I said, being just over 100 days since the election and 146 since Carney officially became Prime Minister. David, kind of, what's your thoughts on how this is shaping up with the new PM?
Well, my first thought is I can't believe it's been that long. It's just stunning to me. You especially when you cover this, there's always a period of transition where you're like, okay, there's an old Prime Minister, now there's a new Prime Minister. Who are the cabinet ministers again? Who are the public servants that I need to pay attention to because everyone's changing what's going on? And I just woke up one day and everything was different, and it's been truly extraordinary. So it's been a bit strange, to be honest with you, but it's also been remarkable because I have never seen such a rapid tone shift and sort of memory holding of a past government from a government that of the same party that's replaced it. I mean, you always get a little bit of that. You had it with Chrétien Martin, for instance, but this was like night and day. Like it was two different universes, two different. It's almost like there was two different parties, right? And that's of course the Liberal Party's talent in some ways. But it's been extraordinary to watch Mark Carney come in and just essentially, among other things, fundamentally not be Justin Trudeau.
Yeah, I've seen a few people comment that he's the first progressive conservative Prime Minister we've had in the last 40 years, which there's a little bit to that, which works for me. I'm kind of happy with the tone shift, but it has been stark on that for sure.
Extraordinary. And ahead of the, I was one of the people who said that back in the spring, and I talked to Arthur Mark Bory, who wrote the book on Pierre Poilievre, and ahead of Carney winning the leadership, and Mark said, Carney would not be out of place as a Brian Mulroney cabinet minister. I mean, he was just so fundamentally in the make and mold of a Brian Mulroney cabinet minister. And honest to God, I think if you go back to 1990, 1991, 92, and imagine the trajectory of that progressive conservative party, and absent everything that happened after, and say, okay, well, say it had survived, the 93 election, what would it look like today? Honestly, I think it would look a lot like Mark Carney's Liberal Party. And so I do think there's something to that. But again, it's extraordinary to see this government be in many ways so different than the previous one. And everyone who was a part of the previous one, or many people who are part of the previous one, just sort of slough it off. Like, well, brand new day. Forget the last 10 years. We'll pick and choose the parts we like. The Canada Child Benefit. Yeah, that was us, But, digital services tax, the capital gains increased tax, online
carbon
news
tax.
Act. No, carbon tax. No, we never heard of her, I don't know her. And it was like, okay, well, all right. It's a reboot.
The stuff that a year ago we were insisting needed to be done because it was the only thing standing between Canada and authoritarianism, right-wing populism, all that. Yeah, just forget about that. We're going a different direction.
Cabinet ministers who right up until January, February were, all in the trenches, bayonets ready to go defend the digital services tax, the carbon tax. In March, we're like, nope, we're out.
Yeah. What was it that Freeland said? It was something like that the capital gains tax was the only thing standing between Canada and rampant inequality, or I can't even remember the exact quote, but it was something along those lines. And then just not the same anymore, I guess.
All of a sudden,
I guess we solved
changed.
all of that and didn't need the tax after all.
No, there's no more inequality. No, there's no more. No, we're fine. And it's funny because it's so cynical, and then this might be a bit of a theme of the episode, perhaps. Everyone sort of shrugged and said, "Okay, yeah, but what do you want, Pierre Poilievre? You want Donald Trump to win? What are you going to do?" And and so Mark Carney has had this prolonged honeymoon where the Liberal Party, which was in the depths of relevance, in January, was on its way out, was headed for historic defeat, is now back, and everyone quite likes Mark Carney as prime minister, certainly compared to Pierre Poilievre, and they're willing to give him a lot of leash to go and do what he's got to do to deliver on the agenda he campaigned on, and perhaps the agenda that he didn't campaign on. So it's pretty extraordinary to watch.
Yeah, and the thing I've heard from at least a few conservative types is that they're just kind of pretty fine with a lot of this stuff. That's the other thing is we haven't taught polls in a while on this show, but if you were to pop any of the recent ones open, there's like 8-10 point gap now in there, and a lot of it seems to be just the conservative support softening, and the general vibe that seems to be correlated with that is, yeah, this kind of seems fine. There's not a lot to really complain about him from the right on that, and that I think is just going to give a lot of leeway for Carney and make quite a bit of room, and basically not having a left flank to worry about really gives a lot of room.
Well, that's it, and the critiques are going to come from the left primarily, the substantive critiques. You're going to get a lot of, I think, nonsense from some on the right, where the critiques are going to be exaggerated and affected. But I don't think that's going to resonate with people. I think people are going to, a plurality of people are going to say, "Come on, give me a break." You got everything you wanted. It's just not going to work because Mark Carney isn't Justin Trudeau, and so those hits aren't going to land. And as you say, on the left, I think there's some genuinely important critiques to raise about the consultation, the place of Indigenous nations within the Canadian political landscape under a Carney government, environmental concerns, pharmacare was kind of sold down the river, and so on and so forth. But then people are going to default to, well, we don't want Poilievre. we don't want Trump to win, and what left? Where's the NDP? They don't really seem to exist, and they won't be a factor for, I think, some time as they kind of get their affairs together. So I think that's part of the reason we're seeing Carney move at pace right now. One is that it's expected of him, and he promised he would, but two, it's the ideal moment to do so because there's just little standing in his way.
Yeah, I've got a couple thoughts on that, but most notably, is it actually at pace? There was a lot of movement early on, a couple big bills signed, some executive order theater around the carbon tax and stuff, but other than the flurry of activity in March and April, and I guess a little bit in May as the legislation was being pushed through, the big border bill and the big economic / speed up projects bill, doesn't seem like there's been a lot happening in the last couple months, and all that energy's starting to kind of feel like it's dissipating a little bit. And I don't know, I'm almost starting to wonder in the last few days if we're kind of going to be seeing a bit of what plagued the Trudeau government of make a bunch of noise, do a bunch of announcements, but then the actual execution just drags out for so long.
Yeah, this one's strange because we're in this period where Parliament would typically rise. So it makes sense you get a flurry of activity when Carney becomes Prime Minister and when he wins the election and the House of Commons returns, a new session begins, and they push hard on Infrastructure Bill C5, and they start the process on the Border Bill C2, and then everyone kind of breaks for the summer because everyone's just absolutely ground to dust. You want your cabinet ministers to figure out their jobs. You want civil servants who are changing roles to kind of get a foothold. There was a big shift there. So I think, in a sense, the government has gone semi-dormant, and people, but for all appearances, but underneath the ground, sort of like bugs, I guess, underneath. That's not meant to be derogatory. The analogy seems derogatory, but it's not meant to be. It's like, underneath the leaves as the seasons change, there's actually a lot of activity going on. There's a lot of life milling about. You just don't see it. But it's there, even though the policy agenda is kind of quieted. But what is really replaced, when I say at pace, what I'm thinking of is trying to negotiate a deal with the Americans on trade. Like, that's still really, really going. Although right now that's eased off because we couldn't get a deal. Just, despite Carney saying we're going to deliver a deal in July and it's going to be August, and now it's like, well, we don't know. So I think you're right, and I think the reality is somewhere in between. But I do think when we come back in the fall, because the House will be back, and we're going to start talking about, maybe getting rid of the Online News Act, which the government has telegraphed, which I think would be a great idea, by the way, and trade negotiations with the Americans, and perhaps a renegotiation of the USMCA, and then actually trying to perhaps start thinking about specific projects they want to get done. I think you're going to get a real flurry of activity in September.
Yeah, a lot of that's just the sort of thing that's going to take time, or you're dealing with an unreliable negotiating partner, so putting any kind of deadline in the window on that, or any expectation setting might be a bit problematic there. But yes, the projects part in particular that I'm kind of curious to see, and was kind of expecting a little more. Like, yeah, I get that it's now August and you don't announce a lot in the final stretch of summer, but at the same time, if we are to take the government seriously, and I think we should on this, that there is actually a genuine sense of urgency because of the underlying situation, and there is a requirement to move fast, you kind of would have expected a little more to happen on that. At least one or two things being seriously put in the window, and other than more discussions and joint statements with premiers about an energy corridor, you're not really seeing anything get announced or pushed forward on that. And that's what's surprising me, because, yeah, if you do have to restructure the economy because there's now a big tariff wall in place, you kind of need to have as much lead time as you can on that, because those sorts of things just take a while to execute, and you're not executing them now. That's going to be a long time before that actually gets in place and starts having positive effects.
Yeah, I think there's a major vulnerability here for the government, because they have set expectations for themselves, and they've set them quite high. They set a very ambitious deadline for getting C5 passed, and then they managed to do it. I was a little bit surprised, to be honest with you. They set a really ambitious timeline and high bar for trade negotiations in Trump. They talked about, we're going to get, internal economic activity and trade going. They're going to see results. And as you mentioned, it takes time. So they've essentially set the criteria against which they'll be evaluated. And in some sense, they've set the timeline for evaluations too. And the bar is high. And what we found so far from the numbers that I've seen is, people are willing to give the government some leeway. I think they're pretty reasonable. They say, okay, Trump is essentially a maniac. He's, to say the least, unreliable. And you stepped into a pretty big mess that you got to clean up. So, we'll give you some time to figure it out. But I also think you might see public opinion start to shift quickly and seemingly out of nowhere if the government doesn't start delivering at some point. Because at some point, people are going to say, okay, where are the dragons? George R.R. Martin, you've been promising us dragons and a new book for a really long time. Where are these things? You got to deliver. And I think the question isn't if that's going to happen. The question is, when is that going to happen? Is it going to be, by Christmas, or is it going to be a year from now? And the truth is, who knows? We can't say for sure.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting one to watch.
And I'll just say this really quickly. You'll recall that Justin Trudeau was Teflon coated and untouchable in 2015 and 2016, and then he wasn't.
Well, even kind of through up till 2019.
Yeah.
That mid-election blackface thing would have sucked most other politicians.
It's stunning. It's stunning, and obviously the pandemic hastened that decline and generated all kinds of forces that any government was going to have a hard time managing. But I mean, that's part of it. So I think the government must know that they've got some grace, but it will not be infinite.
No, and we're already chewing through a lot of that time. Just what, 20%, 30% of the window that Carney gave to hit the 2% of defense spending's already elapsed? Because we're going to have that in place by March. Which is what, 0.7% of GDP we were going to get out the door.
I was stunned by that. I was like, on what? I know there's lots of things you can do with that money. You can pay people more. You can, retrofit and upgrade bases, and you can build new bases in the north, and you can buy, equipment and fighter jets, ships, and so on and so forth. But the actual spending of that money is going to take time. It's a lot of money to spend. Yeah,
and yet they put, I think it was March of 2026, that's when they were going to hit that spending, and even some of those, the bases are in a pretty terrible state of repair. Some of that could be worked on quickly. Some of it's a multi-year contract at the shortest.
Yeah, and I think it's all part of this idea that we're going to spend it quickly in fiscal 2025, and then there's going to be ramp up in 2026, 2027, so on, to meet the new targets. And I was like, okay, maybe, but you have to present a budget at some point too. And I think there's a couple of things that are in the background that we forget about, that we won't forget about for long. One is there's a budget at some point. And, I don't get as worked up about the budget as some people do, because the budget is a political document. It's really kind of a roadmap more than anything else. The government needs money, and it gets it by going to Parliament basically to ask for money, and the real budget comes from the main estimates, and so it's going to go through that process because legally it has to. But at some point they're going to have to deliver a budget as we think of a budget, in the House of Commons, big old speech, the whole thing, and also. And people are going to hate me for saying this, but the next election, like, don't think for a second this government isn't thinking about the next election. And they have, what people have called a functional majority or a working majority, but they are going to be looking to grow that seat count into a proper majority with a little bit more breathing room. And I don't doubt for a second that they're eyeing that. And when people say, what's going to happen to this parliament and how long is it going to go? The thing that I was saying and others were saying was, if the smart money is this thing ends when the Liberals decide to end it. It'll be the Liberals who trigger the election, not the opposition parties.
Yeah, I think that's almost certainly going to be the case, especially if the Conservatives continue to lag by 10-ish points. It's going to be real tempting to pick an opportunity to try and pick up those extra couple seats at the Conservatives' expense. And, from what I've seen, it's not like the Conservatives have exactly been adapting to the moment particularly well.
No.
And I think there's like a lot you could say positive about their results in the last election. Getting the largest share of the votes in Small Rooney, best performance of the modern incarnation of the Conservative Party, all that, significant growth in seat count. But they kind of did that by holding on to a wave that had already crested and was starting to come back down after Trudeau left. And for all of his political chops, Pierre Poilievre's not exactly the most flexible of politicians, and that that may have worked well in terms of relentless message discipline, but it seems ill-suited to a moment like this. And I don't know, I think he probably has enough of a grip on the party that he's going to be able to hold on to his job, but I don't know if he's going to be able to rebuild the political momentum he had a year ago.
Yeah, I'm not sure, and I wrote about this for my Substack, and it was republished in the Walrus, and it was basically, Pierre Poilievre is a walking Greek tragedy. He got everything he wanted, and it cost him everything, right? He's like, I don't want the carbon tax. All right, carbon tax is gone. I don't want the planned expansion of the capital gains inclusion rate. I'm like, okay, capital gains inclusion rate, gone. I want energy projects. Energy project? Yeah, we can do energy projects. I want an election. Election? Yeah, we can do an election. And then he loses, right? And Mark Carney and the Liberals get credit for all the things the Conservatives have been calling for forever, and they might again with the digital services tax, if the online harm or the online news act is rescinded, which it might be. Same thing, and it must be just infinitely frustrating. I mean, how do you come back from that, right? When some guy walks in and says, "Okay, I'm going to do all these things you've been saying. I'm going to do it from the side of the aisle that has been defending it for years, and then we're going to walk away the beneficiaries of this." I mean, it's honestly, I'm not a conservative. I wasn't pulling for the Conservatives, but even I was looking at it and thinking, I'm like, he got a raw. You're probably the Conservatives got kind of a raw deal politically and electorally, but they also got the policy agenda they wanted in many ways, which, on a substantive level for them, is a win. But of course, electorally, not so much.
Yeah, and that might also be part of what's muting the Conservative support is, the block of the vote that wants to see stuff happening and isn't just an electoral machine focused part is kind of happy with what's been going on for the most part. Mm-hmm. And yeah, that does make it pretty tough though to launch a substantive complaint. Like, what can you say? They're not moving fast enough. They should have done a little bit more. Like
Yeah, they don't have
today-
the deal with Trump yet, you know,
Yeah.
and but like Polyev wouldn't have a deal with Trump either. That's not.
I don't think
you
anyone
know,
would at this point.
No one would. Exactly. And I think, like, as a thought experiment, imagine that the House of Commons didn't have parties. Imagine it just had individual MPs who would deliberate about what they thought was best according to, you know, their constituencies and their consciences and their own ideology and all those things. And I think it would actually kind of look a little bit like what we have right now, you know, because I think the majority in the Commons, and in many ways the majority in the country, are happy with the Carney agenda. I mean, I've got lots of critiques of them, but I'm saying that doesn't matter. I'm not the emperor. Not everybody thinks with me and agrees with me. I think most people are kind of like, yeah, that works. Like to echo something you said earlier, I'm like, yeah, this is fine. You know, it's fine. This is great. No problem. I can go about my day, you know, do other things. And I think that's ultimately for the vast majority of Canadians, for them, the goal of politics is to not have to pay attention to politics, right?
Yeah, there's something to be said for that. And the thing I always remember on that is that the change elections tend to be the ones with the high turnout, and we're just going to re-elect the government are usually the lower turnout ones, because everyone's kind of just fine with it at that point, and things are satisfactory enough they don't really need to pay attention, which, you know, for political people like us might be a little frustrating, but kind of a sign things are going fairly well. What was that? I want to say Oscar Wilde quote. Oscar Wilde? Forget who it was. That, you know, the problem with socialism is there's too many damn meetings.
Yeah.
Yeah. The don't need to attend all the meetings is a spot I think a lot of people kind of like to have.
Yeah, it's exhausting, and I want, you know, grit in my politics, and I want contestation, and I want there to be struggle, and I do believe in those things. But equally, the idea that we want a world in which we're always inundated with the news of the day, and we're glued to the breaking stories, et cetera, is basically what you get in the current United States. And I don't think anybody really wants that here. We don't want it there either, right?
No, it's exhausting.
You know, yeah, it's exhausting. It obliterates the mind. And I do think people should be involved in their politics and so on and so forth. But I also think that politics is a means to serve life, not the other way around. And so, you know, I sort of have mixed feelings about it, but it's nice not to be in the midst of a bunch of chaos or melodrama. Like the Trudeau Liberals were exhausting and melodramatic.
So much.
The
And
Carney Liberals aren't.
Yeah, and that's part of the thing where the Conservatives haven't adapted is they fought melodrama with melodrama.
Mm-hmm.
And when everyone was sick of the old melodrama, that kind of worked. But it just comes across as just tone deaf, but unserious.
Mm-hmm.
And is only going to hurt them unless they can swing back to a more Harperish or O'Toole mold that's maybe might be a little boring, but serious about it.
Yeah, and if the Conservatives aren't careful, they're going to find themselves on the fuzzy end of the lollipop, the way that the Tories did in the early to mid half of the last century, where the Liberals just dominate. I mean, the Liberals have dominated for most of Canadian history, but, you know, the Mackenzie King was prime minister for 26 and a half years or something like that, 21 and a half years. It could happen. We could have just Liberals forever if you have a kind of wily, cynical Liberal who also sort of believes in enough of what they're doing to advance a compelling and credible agenda. And I kind of think that's Mark Carney. Like, I believe he believes most of the things he says, but he can do politics. He learned politics pretty fast. It was, at least electoral retail politics. And
a decent amount of it.
He's not perfect, obviously. But he's getting polished,
the expectation setting you could probably ratchet back a little bit. More normal.
Yes. Yeah. And the idea that the government's going to move at the speed of business indefinitely. I'm like, no, you're absolutely not. Like take C5, for instance. The infrastructure bill, for all intents and purposes, the infrastructure bill. The idea is we want to get these big projects built and we want to get them built fast. Now, I thought we were going to get a lot of protest around C5, and we didn't get too much. It was pretty muted. But then it occurred to me, actually, the protest is going to come when the individual projects are pursued, right? It's going to be at that slightly more granular level of, okay, here's a bridge we're going to build, here's a pipeline we're going to build, whatever it might be, and there's going to be an indigenous nation or group or environmental group or so on. So I'm going to say no, and we're going to sit down and on the tracks, or we're going to occupy this space or whatever. We're going to move, we're going to rally, and then you're going to have some sand in the machine. And so that's coming. That I truly believe that's coming. And the government then is going to have to see, okay, well, how do we adapt with that? But I do think Carney is wily because he's been able to kind of triangulate almost the median in this country on most issues. It's been pretty extraordinary, and he's had no problem walking things back. I think to his credit, whether you like the decision he's made or not on X, Y, or Z, he said, or Z, I should say, he looked at something and say, this is a bad idea. People don't like it. Let's get rid of it. On so many things, just like tear it all out.
Indeed. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what the first couple projects are rolling out to put a BC spin on it. We had our own version of C5 that actually predated that by a couple weeks. And similar thing, it's passed, but we don't have any projects yet. And you'd almost think it would be good to get a couple like real easy ones in the window and start to build the consensus that this is actually a good bill that's going to deliver good results. In BC, Olympic Village School, super simple one. Everyone agrees it should have been built years ago, but City of Vancouver is pushing it, making it go through like another rezoning because it's like a meter taller than it was originally zoned for, or something stupid like that. And perfect case of let's just knock out all of the dumb procedural things that are getting in the way but have no real bearing on the quality of the project. And it would be interesting to see if Carney can pull a couple of those ones out federally and at least get something rolling that, like you said, gets the median person to nod along with.
Yeah, and it's I think it's going to matter what you lead with. We don't want another infrastructure bank, right? First of all, it's like, oh, the infrastructure bank is going to solve all our problems. And like, what's the infrastructure bank doing? And I think that's a symptom of something you mentioned earlier, which is the Liberals under Trudeau were making big announcements, and then we're like, okay, now what? What's happened? They also were wildly unfocused. They tried to do everything, which that became a problem, quite a big problem. The Carney government is going to have I think the challenge of trying to decide something that is going to get the buy-in or the proof of concept that you suggest, but without tearing the country apart from day one. Incidentally, I think the winner there is something that I've seen a few economists, including Blake Schaefer, have suggested, which is east-west electricity grid. To me, or power grid, I should say. To me, that he wrote the case for that. Blake Schaefer did in Maclean's. I think that's a compelling idea. That's not without controversy because you've got to build it like you build anything else. But it's a good idea, and I think something you'd get a lot of purchase for. So I'd love to see some movement on that. Who doesn't love an east-west? It ticks all the boxes. Clean energy, right? Tick. National sovereignty. National security, tick. Nation building, tick. It doesn't carry oil, tick.
Well, that last one I could see being the point of contention because
yeah, right.
You can bet that
yeah, that's right.
One or two provinces are going to try and expand that out, and like you said, lose focus and try and do everything by turning that into the national energy corridor idea. So
yeah,
even that might
I think I know which two you're thinking. Yeah, and I think this is, you know, what it's funny is I remember on a few occasions I've been asked by people to say, you know, say something nice about Stephen Harper. You know, what did you like about Stephen Harper? And I actually really like getting this question, which is why I'm asking it to myself right now. But, you know, one of the things I liked about Stephen Harper is I think he understood federalism quite well and managed it quite carefully. And I think Mark Carney is playing with fire with the way he's approached federalism, with these big meetings with all the premiers at once. Like, you can ride that train for a while, but eventually, you know, it starts to shake and you get worried about a derailment. And because that's how you end up getting, you know, mugged by the premiers. And there's a couple in particular, obviously, you know, Daniel Smith and Scott Moe, who are going to use every occasion they can to try to wrong foot the feds and to advance their own particular interests. And, you know, and Doug Ford has been Team Carney to say the least. He's been Carney's hype man for a while and continues to be. But, you know, that's only going to take you so far.
I would definitely agree with that characterization of Harper. I think it's underappreciated just how chill the whole national unity thing was during his time on that. And yeah, like you said, he doesn't get enough credit on that one, I don't think.
He doesn't.
Yeah, and yeah, those were the two I was thinking of, the two premiers. I could see Ford maybe joining in with that a little bit. The thing on the pipelines that I always come back to, though, is I think it's line 5, the main line that connects the oil sands to eastern Canada and Ontario. Part of that route goes through the States, and these days it really feels like there should be a route that is entirely within Canadian territory.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough sell. I mean, I do think at some point people are going to lose patience and say, whoa, you know, it's elbows up, but you cancel the digital services tax. You agreed to spend more money on the military because of Trump, and maybe substantive reasons, but Trump is a big part of that. You agreed to strengthen the border because of Trump. You got a fentanyl czar because of Trump. You're going to buy the F-35 still, it sounds like, even though they're American, and, you know, we're supposed to be wary of Americans, and you're pursuing a trade deal. And you want to run a pipeline through the U.S. Like, at some point, we're like, okay, where do our elbows go? Like, where are the elbows here? Right? Are they up? Are they down? Are they at our sides? You know, Carney sits in the Oval Office and calls Trump a transformative president. And liberals sort of say to me, they try to parse that and say, well, you know, transformative isn't necessarily good. I'm like, okay, but, you know, we know how he intended in the White House. And I think at some point we're going to say, okay, you know, what are we getting for all this? Right?
Yeah, two quick thoughts on that. The military one, I definitely see how it played, where it seemed like we were doing it because of Trump. I think there's more substantive reasons behind that, both of which is the past several Democratic presidents have raised the same set of complaints about it, but also, you know, in a world where the U.S. is less of a reliable ally that will come in if something bad is happening, that generally necessitates a larger standing armed forces rather than a smaller one, because we would just need to be able to handle a wider range of scenarios ourselves or with a smaller pool of allies at that point.
Yeah. In the North, right? I mean,
yeah,
what the hell are we doing in the North? This is the site of contestation for the coming decades, right? We know there's, you know, the little scuffle with Denmark over Hans Island or whatever it is, notwithstanding. I mean, we know that there's China, Russia, the United States, and Canada, where we get into a little, you know, dust ups over that. Shipping lanes are going to open up. It's going to be a real contestation over who owns what and which waterways are controlled by whom. We're talking about expanding the port of Churchill for one of these reasons, and so on and so forth. This is it. Like, we're going to have bases there. What kind of monitoring are we going to do? What kind of patrolling are we going to do? Where's that coming from? And so I agree with you entirely that there's real substantive concerns there, but I wonder if the public perception is going to match that. I'm genuinely not sure.
Yeah, and that was kind of the other point, is that because of how it was phrased, particularly in the election carrying forward, Carney kind of bots himself in and just doesn't give himself a lot of room to do things like beat a strategic retreat on a few of these items here as they come up. I think the digital services tax was the first one that I saw people kind of start to roll their eyes a little bit at. Are we really letting the Americans dictate everything? And that hadn't been the case on some of the other stuff before. So I think the patience might be wearing a little thin on some of that.
I think so. And Biden hated that to your earlier point. Biden, the Biden administration hated the digital services tax too. I mean, they called it a trade irritant. The DST was an OECD undertaking, and it was meant to be done as with OECD countries together. It was a multi-state effort to say, okay, these companies operate all over the place, and they should pay fair taxes wherever they operate. And the U.S. was sort of like, okay, maybe, we'll see, because all the companies are American, and they're like, we'll see, I don't know. And they kept sort of stalling and temporizing. And eventually Canada just said, okay, well, forget it. We're going to go it alone, which was a huge tactical error, right? And a strategic error, rather. And then they could box themselves in on that, and finally then walked it back. But you're right. People are kind of like, I don't know. And that's a fair point. And actually, incidentally, this is a bigger problem is the Liberals. The Online News Act, I think, was one of those cases too, where they kind of wanted to do the right thing, but again, they goofed up so bad that then you have no choice but to either say, no, it's fine, don't worry about it, like the Trudeau government did, or come in and say, you know what, it is a mess, and we got to start over, and then you lose all this time and energy and money and so on it, which, sunk cost fallacy being what it is, you got to get over it, but like, oof, people's patience wears.
Yeah, that one I think is kind of emblematic of a lot of late Trudeau era politics and policy, where it is heavy on the rhetoric, if you want to be derogatory, the virtue signaling aspect of it, and pretty sloppy on the actual policy and thinking through the implications of it all. So for those who don't remember, and the Online News Act was the one that required major companies to basically pay for every time someone linked to a media site's stories and whatnot, and that led to Facebook or Meta basically just deciding, nope, we're not playing on this one. We're just gonna not allow any news on any of our services, and kind of think they had a reasonable point there, because it was based on a fundamentally flawed premise that linking was something that cost the people being linked to and was of benefit to the service that was hosting the link. And that never made any sense. The main benefit was traffic got driven to them. It was not a cost that the media organizations bared on it.
Yeah, it was, honest to God, I have nothing charitable to say about this beyond that I do think their heart was in the right place, in the sense that they're like, okay, well, we want to try to give money to journalism writ large, in one way or the other. We got to have a fund here because we got to try to save news, and rather than just pay that out of general taxes or whatever, they're like, okay, well, we're going to levy a very specific targeted tax based on these organizations carrying news. And, opponents called it a link tax, and the industry picked up on that, and they said, wait, well, hold on a second, we're actually providing a public good by hosting this stuff, so we're out. Google didn't. Google, to their credit, I think, Google went along and played ball. They kicked and screamed, but they ultimately played ball. Meta didn't. They called the government's bluff, and I think successfully. So it was a huge, again, strategic error to cast it in this way because it allowed the companies to walk away and say, okay, well then we're just not going to carry this stuff because what's in it for us? And if the response was, well, it's your public duty, like, okay, have you met the free market? Like, what are you talking about? Our duty is a fiduciary duty to our shareholders, not to you. And this isn't a B Corp. Like we're playing. This isn't small ball. We're playing serious baseball here. And I so I appreciated the spirit of what they were doing, but it was just so silly and embarrassing. So
yeah, they. At some point, it became more about the vibes of big tech than whether or not it actually made sense as a way to structure supports for the media industry. And yeah, that's kind of what I meant by like it got kind of virtue signally at the end, and ultimately just was pretty sloppy. So kind of happy to see Carney floating the idea this week that that one may be repealed.
I will be the first person in whatever newspaper I'm writing for that week, the Globe Mail probably, to say good on you if he does it, because it's the right call. I mean, it's just there are better ways to do this. It was a bad policy. It was ill-conceived and ill-executed. I still think we need the money for journalism, but not like this, and it's harmed outlets, right? Small outlets in particular, local outlets, were just decimated by being de-indexed, removed, banned from meta platforms. Like they were just crushed. And bigger outlets can absorb that, smaller outlets can't. So it was a big problem, and it's ironic because the policy goal was ultimately undermined by the policy itself.
Yeah,
it harmed journalism.
Yeah, pretty common failing in a lot of cases, just not to think more than one step ahead on the chessboard here.
Yeah. Job one's got to be do no harm, right? And if you're going to design a policy, like maybe the policy is inefficient, maybe it doesn't meet all its state objectives, maybe et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But if it does harm on its own criteria, if it not only doesn't fails to live up, but it actually makes things worse, then that's a problem.
Yeah, it's one thing if they're, you make a conscious decision that there's a trade-off here. We're going to take a little harm in this area to get more benefit in this area, and it passes the cost-benefit test. When you're failing the main benefit you're promoting on this one, that's just an all-around screw-up.
Yeah, it's not going to work.
Okay, well, one final story here before I let you go. Elections Canada's out with a solution to the longest ballot committee's shenanigans, or at least a quasi-solution. So they announced this week that in Battle River Crowfoot, they just aren't going to bother printing out the giant long ballots with the 214 candidates that are there, and instead they're just going to use the special ballot thing where you get handed a list of candidates and a slip of paper with a spot to write it in, which one you choose, and just go from there.
Yeah. I mean, what a mess. I'm so torn on this because in a sense, I respect the spirit of what the longest ballot folks are trying to do, which is they're trying to say, look, we don't think politicians should be setting the rules that they're then playing by because it could be torqued and so on and so forth. And then they like electoral reform and so on. And I get that. But the story hasn't been about democratic reform. The story has been about the longest ballot and the absurdity of the ballot itself, right? So it's become a kind of sideshow to the broader substantive issue that the committee is trying to highlight. And Elections Canada is stuck because the Elections Act doesn't really give them a lot of room to decide who's on the ballot, right? That's a political question that's going to, ironically, it's going to be, again, so they're talking about what we just talked about again, that's going to be settled by the House of Commons and the Senate, who are going to have to look at this and say, okay, well, we might have to change the Elections Act now to decide, what the criteria are for getting on the ballot and where. And so that's almost certainly going to be a discussion in the fall. I have a feeling we're going to see a legislative change to the Elections Act, which could become an issue because you open up the Elections Act, and we've seen in the past it gets kind of messy. But I think the election will be fine. It's a by-election with the leader of a party. It's getting a lot of coverage. People are going to know who Pierre Poilievre is. You don't have to get the spelling right. If it's close enough for jazz, it's counted. It'll be a little more work for the scrutineers, I'm sure, but it'll be fine. But it has become a sideshow.
Yeah, and even when we get to the point of when they're going to be reviewing the Elections Act and potentially bringing in changes, probably not going to be the changes the longest ballot people want to see. It's going to be, how do we make it so this doesn't become a clown show every election, rather than how do we actually make the electoral system work a little better? And yeah, it's probably just going to be doing some of the stuff talked about to make it a little harder to coordinate between all of the various nominally independent candidates on there.
It'll be something with signatures or official agents or whatever. And in fact, what it's going to do is it's going to make it marginally more difficult to run. At the end of the day, It's actually just going to make it harder. And again, I say marginally because, look, I'm for expansive democratic rights. I'm for grassroots political involvement. I'm for all of these things. But let's not get ahead of our skis here and scream that it's the end of democracy because it's slightly more difficult as an independent candidate to stand. That's not your problem. If we're worried about independents not getting elected to the Commons or being taken seriously, getting on the ballot is not the challenge there. Right? It's the party system and the way Parliament works. Right? It's not has very, very little to do with the actual mechanics of standing in an election. Let's focus on the real issues here rather than the sideshow stuff.
Yeah, and anything they're likely to do to make it a little tougher to stand for election, and even some of the stuff we're just going to make it so someone can't be the official agent for two or more candidates in the same riding, which fair enough, because in theory they are competing against each other, so there shouldn't be behind the scenes coordination on that. That is in its own way a little anti-democratic.
I was surprised. I'm not an expert in the Elections Act. I was surprised that was allowed. When I saw it, wait a second, you could do that?
I think in general there was you don't need to have an independent one, so a party could have 3 adjacent ridings be managed by the same person, which makes sense. But yeah, the same riding one, I guess nobody thought you needed to do that until now.
That's right. It's one of those things where, fair enough.
Yeah,
right.
You why patch would that it when it becomes a problem. But yeah, anything besides that they're going to do is likely to be so a low enough barrier that if you had a realistic shot of even getting 15% of the vote, you'd be able to clear it. And at that point, anyone who's meaningfully offering people a choice is going to be able to get on there.
Well, exactly. Exactly. And people are just well, the more the merrier, and we need more people and more voices and so on and so forth. And let me tell you, someone who studied political psychology and democratic deliberation and institutions for a long time, you actually get to a point of diminishing returns very quickly. Right?
Yeah, it's the whole paradox of choice thing.
It is exactly the paradox. That's exactly what I was thinking of. If you're trying to buy a pair of jeans and you've got 400 pairs of jeans and 10 different criteria for choosing jeans, you're actually going to choose a worse pair of jeans. I say this as someone who's thinking about buying jeans. But it's also how Barry Schwartz opens that book, but which is great, by the way, and highly recommend it. But exactly, it's you know what? Too much. No one's paying attention. If there's even 8 candidates, I don't know. I'm sure you've stood in front of a ballot with 10 parties on it, and they're all
I voted genuine. In the Vancouver municipal elections where it's an at-large system with 70 plus council candidates on
and
there.
The park board, vestigial tail.
And I'm someone who was probably in the upper 5%, if not 1% of politically engaged and knows what's going on. The times I voted in that, I could not tell you anything about the park board candidates on that. even when I was working on campaigns that had park board candidates.
Yeah, it's irrational. It goes back to Anthony Downs, and it's a more fine-grained level of distinction, but it's irrational at some point to know that much, right? Like it's compulsive. If I met someone who was like, I'm really into the park board elections and I have detailed notes on every candidate and so on and so forth, I'd say, you know what? That worries me a little bit.
You need to find a new hobby.
You need to find a new hobby. May I suggest Lego? I really find Lego soothing. I just try Lego or going outside. Like I just, anyways, I could rant about the park board forever. That's a different episode. That's a different episode.
Yeah, which we don't have time for tonight as we're coming up on time. But David, thanks for joining me tonight.
It's been such a pleasure. I'm always keen, and I'm so happy you asked me. So thanks again for having me.
Sounds good. Before you go, why don't you let the listeners know where they can find you?
So I am now a contributing columnist with the Globe and Mail. So you'll find me in the Globe and Mail. I'm a contributing writer for the Walrus. You find me at the Walrus, and I write for Jacobin, and I have a Substack. You can find me at davidmoscrop.com, and otherwise. The Lego store.
Oh, David, thanks for joining me tonight. Have a good evening.
Thanks so much, you too.
And that has been Politicos. Find links to everything we talked about at politicos.ca. Support the show and get access to our exclusive Slack channel at patreon.com/politicos. Our intro music is Beautiful British Columbia by Serge Plotnikov. Politicos is a production of Leg and Boot Media. Audio editing provided by Jesse Woodward at listener-supported CHLY 101.7 FM in Nanaimo. Learn more at chly.ca.